Now there's all kinds of different people in this world. There's only one high.
Welcome to the Team Made Apart podcast, the podcast designed to teach freelancers, contractors, and remote workers, really anyone working apart, how to build better relationships with those they work with and those they work for. I'm your host, Ryan Rogar. Before we get started, financial support for the Team Made Apart podcast is provided by R2, a fully distributed brand relationship consultancy. R2 has specific expertise and experience in helping service companies grow, develop, and maintain impactful relationships through world-class brand strategy and design. R2 supports the world's best distributed companies by providing valuable insights, strategy, empathy, and tactical expertise to help them foster truly meaningful relationships from top management to top consumer. If the success of your business depends on the relationships you make, then you need R2. To learn more or to request a call, simply visit r2mg.com/podcast. That's r2mg.com/podcast. R2, relationships squared. Also, financial support comes from teammadeapart.com. Leveraging 20 plus years of global agency and creative hiring expertise, Team Made Apart provides distributed organizations with access to the best and brightest creative talent from around the world. Through deep understanding of client needs and meaningful relationships with talent, Team Made Apart facilitates a sort of virtual handshake between prospective employer and prospective employee to reduce risk and eliminate doubt from creative hiring decisions. Take a step towards filling that creative-shaped void in your distributed team by visiting teammadeapart.com/talent. That's teammadeapart.com/talent to learn more. Finally, financial support comes from supporters like you. Members of our Happy Little Podcast community can make contributions directly to the show by visiting teammadeapart.com/podcast and clicking on the donation link. Donations can be made in any amount and would go a long way towards keeping this show on the air. If you appreciate the work we're doing and would like to get involved, just visit teammadeapart.com/podcast, click the donate button, and you're on your way. Thanks in advance for your continued support. And now, on to the show. Welcome back to the Team Made Apart podcast. Today's special guest is Kaleem Clarkson. Kaleem is a husband, father, remote work advocate, people operations professional, and speaker. He is the chief operating officer of BlendMe Inc., a remote employee experience consultancy that helps startups and small businesses onboard, engage, and retain their remote teams. Further, he is the founder of Remotely One, a members-only community for remote work professionals, which is fighting isolation by connecting individuals with other location-independent professionals. With more than 20 years of people ops and event planning experience, Kaleem has become a well-known personality in the remote work space. In addition to his routine appearances on the pages of well-known publications from Harvard Business Review to Forbes, his various podcast interviews and keynotes, he hosts a very popular weekly program, Remote Work Wednesdays, on the new Clubhouse app, featuring some of the best and brightest in remote work discussing a topic of the day. Here to chat about the importance of trust and how to foster it on remote teams, how to build meaningful and sustainable relationships when working virtually, and how to use both of those things to build a diverse and inclusive company culture. Please join me in welcoming to the show our guest, Kaleem Clarkson. Hey, Kaleem, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for that unbelievable intro. Appreciate
Absolutely.
that.
I hope I didn't blow too much smoke. And then also the little plug for the Clubhouse. I mean, obviously, I attend your Wednesday sessions. So if anybody's going to be called the best and the brightest, by God, it's going to be me.
Thank you so much. Really,
Absolutely.
Really,
well, hey,
really
Kaleem, can we start? I've been trying to ask this season where people are calling in from. You know, let's really push this remote work thing. So where are you calling in from today?
I'm calling from Atlanta, Georgia.
Awesome.
Yes, I am. Atlanta, Georgia. Although I represent the 207, the state of Maine, that's where I'm from. I live in Atlanta, Georgia now. I've been here 13 years. Love the weather.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it. Well, cool. So let's talk a little bit. I mean, obviously you heard a little bit in the introduction, but Kaleem, let's just talk a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what we're doing here.
Yeah. So my partner and I, we started BlendMe Inc. in 2013. I think we thought that remote work was really interesting back then. And really, I think we can all now agree that it has some challenges, but at the end of the day, it can really help you with work-life integration. So yeah, we started in 2013. My partner, she's the CEO of the company. And outside of talking about remote work and other things, I like to mountain bike and maybe listen to a little little metal music while I do it, I guess.
Yeah, that's awesome. As I was doing some research for the show, I heard that you were in a death metal band or some sort of metal band at some point, and I think that's pretty fantastic.
A little bit.
That's
a little
awesome.
Bit back in college. It was fun.
Nice. Yeah, no, from, I don't know, 16 till my mid 20s, I used to road manage a bunch of bands out of California. And so I spent a lot of time in the music biz too. In fact, my remote work career began in the back of a tour bus. So I was doing concert posters at the time, and eventually I had to charge for
it. We talked about that.
Yeah. So anyway, it was a good time. So, but so let's talk a little bit about just how you got into remote work. I mean, have you always been in the space, or, I mean, did you get a job that led you down this path, or how'd that work?
Yeah, I mean, where it all started is you know, in a previous life, I worked as the director of operations and strategic initiatives for a faculty development center at Kennesaw State University. And, you know, I was trying to become a web developer at the same time. And I'm heavily involved in the Drupal community still. So shout out to Drupal. For those that you don't know, it's a open source platform like WordPress where you can build web pages and other applications. Lots of big companies use it. Whitehouse.gov used to use it, the Weather Channel, etc. So I was out doing a conference at DrupalCon Denver in 2012, and Matt Westgate from a company called Lullabot, who the Grammys were their client at the time, was talking about how they are a fully distributed company. And I never heard that term. He was showing pictures about how his company doesn't have an office and how they didn't want to use the term virtual because he didn't want, you know, their clients to feel like that they want a real company. And he didn't want to use the word remote because people felt distant. So it was just an interesting thing. I never really thought about companies who don't have offices. And, you know, when they were showing pictures of all their employees all over the place, it really, really grabbed my attention. So just like a lot of things, I'm a lifelong learner. Started reading books, read the book Remote, read the book The Year Without Pants, then the 4-Hour Work Week, and really I think it was the 4-Hour Work Week that really kind of opened my eyes as far as what you're really attracted to, and the idea of not being. I think he said something along the lines of most people think that they're attracted to the money, but you're actually attracted to the freedom and their ability to go do things whenever they want. And I found that fascinating of the idea of being able to work but not being attached to a location. So again, my partner had just graduated from UConn in 2010, a couple of years before that, and with her master's degree in human resources and organizational development. And we were just like, why don't we just start an HR company specifically for remote companies? And here we are today.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, and I think one of the things I like the most about you, Kaleem, is that you and I bond a lot over sort of our, you know, mutual interest in things that have to do with sort of, I don't know, the warm fuzzies, the relationships, the empathy, the trust, you know, all these kinds of things. And, you know, that's been our message really from the beginning, is how do we build better relationships remotely? And you and I have sort of found some common ground on that stuff too. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. But what I wanted to lead with is maybe one of the hottest things that's happening right now in the field of remote work. And hopefully it's still a popular comment by the time this show airs here in about 3 weeks. But I think that there's this big movement, right? We're starting to maybe see a downward trend in COVID cases. We're starting to hopefully be recovering from this thing. The economy is starting to ramp back up. And one of the things that's happening is now businesses are saying, hey, I'm going to reopen my office. I want to go back to work. And, you know, we're seeing some studies start to emerge about how people feel about this. And there's this idea of this mandatory return to office. You know, everybody is handling things differently, but, you know, there's a big contingent of sort of what we would call sort of the dinosaurs or the older version, the people who are managing in maybe a more antiquated way. And they're really interested in just, you know, let's get back to the way things were. Let's get back into the office. And so I thought maybe you and I could have a little conversation about this idea of mandatory return to work and see what you thought.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we've talked about this a little bit offline too, and this idea of back to the office required. So keep that phrase in mind, because we're going to be writing a series of blogs on this, because I feel like there's this tension right now, right? And there's this tension between employers and employees behind the requirement to come back to the office. And, regardless of whether you are for returning to the office or not for returning to the office, I feel like making it required just goes against everything that we've learned, right? Obviously, you and I, Ryan, we've been doing remote work for a little bit. So, more power to all the new people who've experienced it. I'm not taking that away from anyone. But this has been happening for years, even before us. Yeah. So,
well, and it's interesting, I think that there is a disconnect that exists, right? I mean, obviously communication is a two-way street. As folks in the remote work industry, like you and I mean, obviously, we really come to appreciate the importance of good two-way communication, right? Because it's critical for remote teams, regardless of synchronous, asynchronous, whatever, any of these fancy words you want to use. Bottom line is we need to be communicating ideas, and we need to be doing so with regularity. But just like in real life, right, between you and a partner or you and a friend or you and your mother, if there's too big a gap between what you want and what you're communicating, then you're sort of opening yourself up to some funky territory. And I'm gonna look down here while I cite the study. But basically, what we're looking at is, based on some recent studies, and I saw one as recent as today that was a little anecdotal, but basically the results were the same. 32% of people are trying to go remote only. 39% are interested in some sort of hybrid situation, leaving only 29% that actually want to go back to work 100% of the time. And I've seen numbers, even lower than that, in the 8 and 10 and 5% that are actually looking to go back. And so I wonder what your thoughts are on sort of this mismatch between, what people seem to want and what are the needs or the wants or the, whatever of the employer.
Yeah. And I'd also like to add to that stat, shout out to Buffer. The 2021 State of Remote Work has an even crazier stat of 97% of people want to work remotely at least part of the time for the rest of their career. Like, and to me, that number is very high. And for organizations and then further down in that, you see organizations, I believe it was 46% of the organizations are going to allow some sort of remote work plan. Yeah. And then the other 50 whatever aren't sure or are not going to. And to be successful in remote work, we always, at Blend, we created kind of this assessment, the remote employee experience assessment. Trust is the first pillar on successfully implementing remote work. You have to assume trust. You have to, that phrase, trust is earned. Well, in this case, you actually have to start with some assumed trust first until, you're proved wrong. And to me, this tension that we're talking about is literally the opposite of trust. We just talked about the stats. You have employees saying, this is what I want. And then you have employers saying, come back to the office. I've heard what you had to say, but we're not even going to address what you had to say. So to me, I just feel like, for companies to make back to office required after what we've gone through, I wish I could comprehend it, because I can't understand how organizations believe that requiring people to come back to the office after the last 12 months, I just don't have any words. I wish I could understand how they could believe that it's going to work.
Well, and it's funny, even in the way that we're bringing it up, right, or the way that we're framing this conversation, this idea of mandatory or required, I think that concept of, whip cracking is very, condescending for one, but I mean, it's also archaic. It's not how you deal with teams these days. And I try to be objective, and I understand, businesses have their needs too, right? And I think it's, you don't want the students running the school necessarily, right? You still have to have some leadership, and you still need to have some people in charge. So yeah, sure, your employees want this, but maybe for one reason or another, your business can't do it or whatever. But more often than not, the excuses I hear are sort of fear-based. It's back to this idea of trust. It's we don't inherently trust you, which tells me you don't trust the people you're hiring, which means you're making not great hiring decisions. So I think there's sort of a fruit of the poisonous tree there, I think. But ultimately, I think it does boil down to this trust, and I think that it's a fear thing that we're trying to overcome, and the idea of it being so black and white or so just flippant that we're not going to go back and that's that. Seems a little bit counterintuitive.
Counterintuitive. Yeah, especially when you're talking about we've been doing this for 12 months. I think that is the biggest piece that is going to be really challenging for a leader, and especially for small businesses. And we've talked about, some people believe it's going to hurt small businesses if everyone goes remote, because no one's going to be in those areas and blase. But hey, everyone likes to eat. The other thing is we talk about is right now is not the correct time to assess how remote work is going to play out, because we're in the middle of a lockdown. Hey, I used to go to a co-working spot that was downtown because I liked the energy, and I would go to the restaurants there. So, you know what I mean? Like it's a very difficult thing. The other thing that I have a really, really tough time with is that many organizations do not gauge their culture. They do not measure their culture. They do not measure how well their organization is engaged. Now, the organizations that do that very well, they could come out and have some data. Like, look, we surveyed our company, and engagement has gone down. Our culture, people are feeling it. And if you have that data that's showing that, and production's down, if you have that data, then okay, it's a good reason. Maybe your company is set up that way, that you can do that. Yeah. But for the most part, Ryan.
Well, I think that's
companies aren't measuring it.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that's a great point, actually, because I think when people, or at least the criticism I see, on LinkedIn and places like that, you've got some remote work advocate that's all gung ho remote work. And then he's pitching some idea that seems new or strange or whatever. And I think, just like we're talking about the all or nothing on the business end, I think people perceive the way these advocates come at remote work as being all or nothing too. And I think it's Laurel Ferrer that really said this to me that in a way that stuck, but it was this idea that it's not about, remote work being the future. It's about flexibility being the future, right? It's be able to work where you can be most productive. And so, but to your point, this idea that if you've actually collected data that shows, hey, our line of work or our type of business, or maybe our leadership can't hold up to doing a great job remotely, and as a result, we can't stay remote. Like, it just doesn't work for our organization. Like, I think that's totally a fair idea versus just coming to the table and saying, well, we just got to get back in the office. We rent this big old place for you guys and you got to come hang out.
Right. And that's the other thing too. It's like, don't come up with these fake stats. Number one, stats that don't exist. Were you assessing your culture correctly? I think that's the other piece. Were you assessing your culture correctly prior to the pandemic? And do you, because, with statistics, you need an A/B. We all talk about A/B testing all the time, right? In the tech space. If you don't have an A or a B, then I really don't know what leadership's going to use for legitimate reasoning to bring everyone back that's going to build trust. We're talking about trust and gaining empathy. The first thing you want to do to erode trust is to just tell people to do it and don't worry about it because we're telling you to do it. Like, that's a beginning way to start eroding trust right there. So
yeah, well, and it's funny too. I think it's probably, it's obviously a misconception, but I think people hear that, oh, I want to work remote, and that translates in some leaders' minds to, oh, well, I just want more time off, or I don't want to come to the office. I want to work in my pajamas or whatever. But one of the factors that I think is still maybe being a little bit overlooked is that for at least a small percentage of these people who are interested in staying remote, they might still be scared of this whole COVID thing. And maybe they're not interested in being in an office with a bunch of people who might get them sick. And just like anything else, if you feel like you're unsafe at work, why should you be forced to be there? Right.
Yeah. You have the safety situation. The other thing is we have families. Tons of people have reevaluated what's important for them in life. And, for myself, my partner and I, we had the experience to be able to go to Maine for 3 months and be around our in-laws where we couldn't have been around them before. And it changed us. I mean, you can't deny that people have reevaluated what's important to them. And for organizations to just totally ignore that, it just doesn't make good business sense. And you know what? Let me tell you this. If you're a small business, there's also another piece to remote work that people are not talking about. And I love the fact that Laurel kind of brought up that piece of all or nothing. But let me ask you this. What were to happen if Company A in the Northeast a few weeks ago had this huge blizzard and you had no remote work, right? You had no remote work implemented. You know, I'm from the North. I remember snow days. Love snow days. Shut the school right down. You know what they do now? Snow's coming up tomorrow. Snow's coming up tomorrow. There's not going to be a school day. You're going to be a snow day. You're going to be doing school from home. Now, for some of you kids, I know that's not great. I love snow days. I understand this. I've seen some people say, oh, our kids are never going to get snow days. Okay, I get that. But remote work is a really, really, really smart disaster contingency plan.
Yeah.
Every business needs to have a disaster contingency plan.
Yeah. So I had a conversation recently for this podcast, actually, with a guy named Dyer, and he was talking yesterday about a meeting type they have where it's called a Tsunami meeting. And basically in these Tsunami meetings, what they do is they come up with a fantastic emergency or situation or scenario or something that what if this happened to our business? How would we survive? And it could be, what if our CEO got hit by a bus? It could be, what if we had an extended power outage? It could be whatever, right? But to your point, without stopping and thinking about that stuff, not too far from just, getting under your desk and learning how to do a fire drill, right? Or get, an earthquake drill in the schools, I mean, even though there may never be an earthquake, that little bit of preparedness is really valuable. And I think to your point, this idea of having remote work as an option, even if it's not your full-time modality, but hey, I've got to go out of town, or hey, I'm having a baby, or hey, so-and-so is out with something, or, whatever, for those people to then be able to just sort of pick up the mantle and work from home, because you've already built the infrastructure, you've already opened up the communication channels, you've already built all this stuff. I mean, what a great opportunity. And, should there be a emergency, or maybe even not an emergency, just a need to close the office, toilets flooded, everybody can keep work going. And actually it ends up being better for you in the long run.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, just think about, we're always going to have natural disasters. You remember in the entertainment biz back in the day in the contracts, and they probably still put these in the contract, right?
Act of God.
The act of God. and if the act of God happens, that's the only way that you don't have to pay the artist.
That's right.
Well,
it's a very slim definition of what force majeure is, by the way. They try very hard not to pay.
It's very, very difficult to prove. But the point is, there were wildfires in California. There's blizzards, there's floods. These things are going to continue to happen. And if you're a small business, the thing that I'm really, really trying to preach is there are a lot of small businesses out there that do not want to adopt remote work for whatever reasons. And I'm talking about family businesses, the blue collar industries. I have a colleague who's in third party logistics, who's, trucking. It's trucking. It's in that, work hard. We all got to be together type feel. And they've been fully remote since like March or April. And, they're located in Massachusetts. And just thinking about the idea of, him talking about, well, hey, if something were to happen, at least my office, the people who are in the Midwest, they can continue to work and you can still do your business. And for a small business, 1 or 2 or 3 days of not being able to work is a lot more impactful and can hurt your business than a big corporation. So in a weird way, this remote work and disaster contingency is kind of more important for these smaller companies, because how long can you hold on without, you have a crazy blizzard or something like that. How long can you hold on without working?
Well, and that's a great point. And also just the fact that, should something happen in your small business, I mean, it's infinitely easier to install remote work policies and stuff like that among your 9 or 10 employees or whatever you have, than it is for, I don't know, one of these, mega companies to do it. I mean, it's not a difficult process, and it's a great emergency contingency to keep you safe and keep you doing business. God forbid it's just the weather, but I mean, it could be something worse, like, COVID-20, so it's so I think that's a great point.
And then not to mention, we're a small business, and your competitor small business or competitor in the industry is offering workplace flexibility. Like, as a company, if you're out here saying back to the office required, do not kid yourself. Do not kid yourself if you don't think that people are not going to, they'll go back to the office, but do not kid yourself if you don't think people are going to be looking for new jobs.
Well, yeah, while they're at the office, they're going to be on Indeed or Monster.com looking for work. So, I think that's a great point too, even just as a differentiator going forward, right? I mean, so the companies that, there are people that just want to be in the office and that's going to be their thing, and that's fine. I mean, remote work doesn't need to be your solution. So, but I think it's going to give, some companies, this flexibility anyway, will give some companies a competitive advantage when it comes to hiring talent and things like that. And I think that that's going to be one of the big boons that comes out of this, right? Is the people who got really good at remote work really fast, they're going to have more opportunity available to them. The folks that, sort of drug their feet and were just looking to go back to the office and get back to normal and kind of move on, those folks are not going to be as equipped. They didn't adapt as quickly as some of these other people. And so as, the job market evolves and flexibility becomes a part of work, and, you've got your big Airbnbs or whoever it are that are selling out of their leases and going fully remote and stuff like this. I mean, you might work for a company that just decides, hey, remote's going to be our new thing, man. This worked out okay. Yeah. I'm sorry you didn't like it, but that's the new thing. And so just like you might not have wanted to return to the office, this person might not want to go remote. But you bring up a good point, which is, and I like it, at least in terms of sort of optimism and I guess empowerment, this idea that there are more fish in the sea, there are more jobs. So if you're not happy in your situation or with your status, if you're not feeling trusted, respected, listened to, then go find another job. There's other opportunities, and maybe that's not true in every country. And maybe it's not even true right now, given sort of the state of our economy. But I think generally speaking, those who are diligent, will find work.
Yeah. And I also think one of the things that you can't underestimate and you can't look over, right? Right now, there's really no, some of the high school sports are kind of happening, but not really. So the need for flexibility, it's still there right now, of course, because, you have some parents who need to, homeschool because of whatever. We've had to do that too. That's a challenge. But just imagine, like, we did my partner and I, we did a presentation for the Association of Legal Administrators. And I could tell in the presentation that there was all the administrators, chief marketing officers, chief operating, IT staff. Most of them want to continue to work remotely. But then we had a lot of lawyers and partners, who were very hesitant and wanted everyone to get back to the office. So again, we had this natural conflict. And what we heard about was like, well, when we get back to, I'm not going to say when we get back to normal. What can we say? When we get back to being able to get together again, there's going to be more need for flexibility. I was listening to this one paralegal talk about, wow, I've been able to, sit with my kid at 2:00 or 3:00 when the school day ends, sit with my child and ask him how their school day went and have these pick my child up at school versus taking the bus. All of these things that as a paralegal, they weren't even allowed to necessarily leave early. Oh, I need to go pick up. Oh, we'll log that time.
Yeah.
Just think about all these tiny little controlling mechanisms that people have had in place that now are just thrown out the window. There's people are having a ton of more sick time available because I don't need to use the sick time.
Right.
I don't need to take an hour to go to my dentist's office. I don't have to do that. So I just kind of feel like I just don't know how we're going to go back to the way it used to be.
Yeah.
When people have people who did not experience this type of life flexibility, have now all experienced what we've been working for years.
Well, and I think even beyond that, I've been sharing this notion around quite a bit lately, but this idea that I think it pays a little bit of a disservice to everything this country's been through to try to return to what it was. Right. I mean, I think that we've been through a really difficult time in this country, and around the world. But I think to not take that as a learning experience that makes us better somehow, I think sort of cheapens all the bad things done. Right. And so I think that it's really important that we think about that. And also, if you, as an employer, as a leader, if you can be empathetic to the fact that everybody's lives have gone through some sort of upheaval. Maybe it's a job loss. Maybe I had to quit to stay home with my kids. Maybe it's just maybe I always worked from home, but now I have kids and a partner at the house. Maybe, but everybody's circumstances are different. Maybe I've been out of work for a while. Maybe I couldn't make my mortgage for 6 months. Maybe, there's such a broad range of things that people are dealing with that to try and say, well, let's just go back to the way it was and sort of, okay, now we're going to go back to the office just like before when you had job security, even though now you don't. And, like before when you were home working alone, but now you have kids and family around. Like, it sort of, I think, discounts the trouble that people have gone through to be so sort of archaic about this idea that, okay, we're going to do exactly like it was, or you're now required to do X, Y, and Z. I think not giving people that empathy or a little bit of that grain of salt to sort of address what happened, what's happening in life right now, I think pays a disservice to people.
I guess I've never really heard it kind of positioned in that way, like a disservice to what we've gone through. That's a really powerful statement. And I think that's something that, if you're listening, I think that's something you should take. If you're going to take one thing out of this podcast or a video, it's definitely that, because when you talk about innovation, organizations were forced to innovate. This wasn't an innovation by choice. This was an innovation by force. Why? Why would you throw away everything that you learned during this phase? Mm-hmm. And then if you want to even talk about going back to the way it used to be, I think you were in this Clubhouse discussion, or maybe you heard it or not. Somebody jumped in and talked about we need to look at when the first office was created. Like, look at the history of work. And if you think about it, a long time ago, where would you go to get your shoe fixed? So go to the blacksmith. The blacksmith would put the sign above the little house, the blacksmith, and you would go to the person's house to get your stuff fixed. You would go to the doctor's office in their little sign above their house. So at one point of time, we didn't work in an office.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the office was created. So it's almost like we're doing this whole full 360 and everyone's like, we got to get back to the way it used to be. Well, if you really want to get back to the way it used to be, you don't have to have an office, because people have their own offices out of their homes.
Well, that's the thing. And I think it's one of these like human characteristics to try and push back on change, right? I mean, this happens to everybody, whether it's in a good or a bad relationship, or leaving a job or getting a new job, or, whatever it is, having a child or anything, right? I mean, change is spooky and change is hard to work through and change is intimidating. And, back to this idea that employers want to go back to the way it was because of fear, I think makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, it really is just sort of this fear of change. And I think that this idea, and you phrased it really well, this idea that, this innovation by force, I mean, what a crappy deal. We spend a year, 14 months innovating, and now we're just going to, that was, fun. Okay. Back to business, let's go back to Microsoft Outlook. We'll call it good.
Yeah. We'll call it good.
Yeah. So I think that's a fair point.
As far as advice, so we want to give a little bit of value here. We could be on our soapboxes all day and talk about this.
Hey,
I love it. And I guess one of the things that I would like to kind of provide some advice. I'm putting on my consulting cap here. Look, if you want to really do this, two things. First, we realize that, you know what, maybe we don't have to work as hard as we have been working all this time. You know what I mean? Like some companies are still profitable. We realize mental health is key. So I think there's some things that are coming out of this pandemic that are part. I think the focus on mental health has shifted, or the focus on people is we're starting to see that shift. But like the idea behind wellness, right? And the idea behind your whole self has come out of all of this. Mm-hmm. So if you're an employer and you're like, we have this lease, we're locked into this lease. So I think that's the other thing. We're spending this money, we're locked into this lease. So gosh darn it, we're going to make use of this space. So I understand that. You don't want to just throw money away. You want to use the space. What I have been advising people is survey your employees. First, determine what the definitions of workplace flexibility is. And I would suggest checking out this company called Work Labs, WERKLABS, so that you can get on the same page of definitions. Because I think that's the beginning confusion is a disconnect between what the employer thinks is workplace flexibility versus what the employee thinks. So you got to get them on the same train track first. So check that resource out. Survey your company and get an idea of what they're looking for first. And then try to figure out a way to design your work flexibility based around the data, and then figure out a way that you can utilize your existing workspace to kind of accommodate those needs. Like, be innovative. You've been innovative. I understand that your office building has been empty maybe for the past 12 months, and you don't want to throw away, that investment that you had invested in, long term. But maybe you reconsider how you're going to use that space. So maybe you reconfigure the office to be more of a conference type space where you can have concurrent sessions and you can have more flexible work arrangements where people can really get there and collaborate. So I just want to kind of to leave a little piece of advice for people that are listening. I'm like, well, I hear what you're saying. We want to do it, but the reality is like we got this bill that's going to last forever because we don't want to break the lease, or we don't. We purchased this building years ago. What do we do now? There are some options out there, and I guess I would just say, please just ask.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, like we do some work with commercial real estate companies, in my marketing company, we do work for commercial real estate businesses. And this has obviously been, hot topic for them, right? We're not moving real estate as quickly as we once did. And how can we retrofit properties to fit whatever's coming next? And I think that, that's a really great idea. This idea of almost really like a co-working facility, right? I mean, some hot desks and some, maybe a couple private places for phone calls and things, and conference rooms or event areas where you can do an occasional get together, or, that kind of thing. But that makes a lot of sense to me for the going forward. One of the things that I've observed and I'm trying to figure out too, and it was sort of a thought triggered by what you were saying, is, I'm trying to figure out you hear stories of Facebook, right? And Facebook is like, hey, we're going to let everyone go remote, but we're going to discount what we pay you based on where you live. And I think that this is kind of a yucky thing. And I think it sort of goes back to, are you really buying into remote, right? Because for me,
this is a difficult topic.
Yeah. And I'm not even sure there's a right answer. And I'll just preface this. I mean, in case it's not totally obvious, I'm not an economist, so I don't really understand how all this works. But what I will say is that it becomes rapidly apparent that we're paying people for their real estate. We're not paying them for the value they bring our company. And so to the point you made earlier, and the one that sort of triggered this idea of, are people, like, what is it we're paying people for, right? What is the value they're providing? Is it that they're sitting in an office in San Francisco? Or because, I mean, by this logic, right, we're going to pay you less if you move to Idaho or Utah or something like that. Well, then are you going to pay me more if I get a sweet little loft in downtown Manhattan or something? Like, I mean, are you going to upsell me too if I get this sweet pad somewhere? Like, I might want to go live in Hawaii for a little while. I mean, are you going to pay me extra for Hawaii? I mean, so I don't understand this logic. And so, but I think it's a really critical thing to try and understand, right, is the value of people and where people are at. And the concept of, do we really need a 40-hour work week? I mean, I know that there's a lot of, remote advocates and people like that who are constantly citing the Industrial Revolution and, this is a relic of that and all that stuff. Right. And I've seen a lot of conversation going back and forth on LinkedIn where it's, hey, we want to go back to the office, but it's just a great place to pad your 40-hour work week, right? You're up at the water cooler, you're talking to your friends, you're, taking a long lunch, you're doing whatever you're doing, you're getting your 40 hours, but, is it really effective? When maybe if you were working remotely, you could work 6 hours a day, get the same amount of work done, and have this extra liberty to enjoy life and spend time with friends and family and build relationships and all that stuff. And so I wonder what your take was on sort of that whole mess.
The salary thing is so difficult to understand. So my initial, I love the fact you brought this topic up. So for all you listening, we have back to work required. That's controversial. And now we have pay me the same no matter where I live, which is also controversial. This is a good, debate that you can have with your colleagues. So my first initial gut reaction was pay everyone the same. Like, what are we doing? Like, you've been paying everybody to watch them. You've been watching over them. Is my code better because I coded it from New York? I pushed the same code and I coded it from Maine or Iowa. Shouldn't I get paid the same? But the more I look into that, the more I thought about it, the more I realized I don't know if that's a fair thing to do, because sometimes you always have to look at unintended consequences of doing things, right? So let's just pretend everyone decides, you know what, we're going to pay everyone the same no matter where you live. What do you think is going to happen to the cities?
Yeah, it's going to be mass exodus.
Right. So then you also are going to have companies, and again, companies are designed to make money, and profitability is a motivator. You're going to have organizations that are going to no longer hire people from New York and San Francisco. You're going to have organizations that are going to be like, oh, well, why should we do that? We're going to only hire, people like if you're going to pay based on cost of living and you're going to adjust the pay, they're going to say, well, we're going to only hire people from Iowa because it's cheaper there. So we can pay a developer less money. So, but then if you pay everyone the same, the question is, okay, are you now penalizing the people that live in high cost areas because you're no longer going to pay them that premium? It is such a difficult problem. And I don't know what the answer is for that, because cost of living, the truth of the matter is, if you make $100,000 in New York and you make $100,000 in Atlanta or $100,000 in Maine, your access to income is different.
Yeah, I mean, that $100,000 will get you a puny little apartment in New York City, but it'll buy you a nice little spread somewhere out in the Midwest.
Right. So then what is fair? And I just don't know what the solution is to that problem. Because in theory, you should pay everybody, and obviously you shouldn't pay this is a sidebar real quick. You probably shouldn't pay everybody the same because you don't want to alienate your top performers. So actually paying everybody the same isn't really a good thing to do, because you want your top performers to make more money than your bottom performers. But that's a whole different topic.
Right.
But just based on remote work.
Yeah. And that's why I brought this up, right? Is because it's challenge. I mean, this is one of these questions that is difficult. And it does, I think, it does beg the question, why aren't we paying people for value anyway? If you're working for me at Facebook, for example, and, your cost of living is higher in San Francisco, but the value you provide the company is less than I'm paying you, then it's not working out very equitably for the company. And I guess they average that out over the folks who do live out in the Midwest or whatever, and they can afford to pay a little more for this guy and a little less for that guy, and it washes out. But it is an interesting question. There's a guy named Andy Triba. He's a former Intel exec and a pretty well-known figure in the remote work world. And he has this concept of a cloud wage. And I think about this kind of a lot because I do a lot of work at Team Made Apart with, people in disadvantaged parts of the world, bad countries, war-torn areas, things like that. Creative people who are looking for work, right? And again, sidebar, I am not an economist and don't pretend to be. But, his concept, or at least the concept of this cloud wage, is that, let's say, for example, I need to have a web project built. I need a website. And this website is worth $50,000. No matter what, no matter where you are, no matter whatever, this thing is a $50,000 object floating in the sky. And if you're in Bangladesh or you're in New Delhi or you're in, Boise, Idaho, it's $50,000 just floating here in this cloud, right? And you're able to get equal access to it, right? But what happens if you have these armies of guys in a country like Bangladesh where, I don't even know what the monthly salary is, but I've got to imagine it's very low. And then all of a sudden they're pulling in these $50,000 projects. I like that they have equal opportunity, but does introducing that much money through an individual in an economy cause problems? I don't really know, but what I like on its face anyway is sort of the fairness factor, right? Anybody from anywhere can get to this thing. And if you happen to have the skills and you're qualified, then we may choose you, so right. I like that paying for merit, paying for value, but what's the long-term consequence?
I do too. But then the question is, okay, as far as the company's concerned, let's just say that there's company A and company B, and company A is in Bangladesh and company B is in the US. So now company A in Bangladesh, they're seeing more profit because they're paying their people less over there, right? And although that cloud item is the same, the results are not the access to revenue is not the same. It's because you're gonna unless the whole world just decides a dollar is a dollar and everybody is worth the same, you're gonna have these inequalities. So yeah, it's such a difficult thing. I think the best thing that I'm kind of leaning towards is kind of the buffer route. Again, throwing out buffer again. Love what they've been doing. Is probably the idea of, okay, we need to up the wage enough for somebody to be to live in Manhattan, and then we got to kind of bring it down just a little bit, just so that it's not so high, and then have some sort of allowance based on maybe an office allowance, per square footage allowance. And I think they have this calculator that determines what your salary is. So all the positions have the same kind of baseline salary based on position, no matter where you live.
Yeah.
But again, this is all ahead of time. So this
sure
when you apply to the location, but then they have another field that gives you a percentage based on cost of living.
Yeah.
And all of this. So if you live in New York, your salary is going to get 8% bump because of cost of living. And again, I know it's not fair, but at least you're seeing that ahead of time.
Yeah.
And that it's open, and that when you decide to kind of change locations, that your salary can kind of adjust based on that. That's the only thing I could think of. That's
and I like that, right? I mean, obviously as remote advocates, we speak about transparency a lot. And I think, letting people know up front versus, pulling the rug out from somebody is a better approach. And I think, obviously it makes sense. We've got to make some adaptations and stuff. So that sounds like a pretty smart policy. I don't know. Maybe it ends up being Bitcoin. That becomes our global currency or something. I don't know. Somebody's gonna have to figure it out. So let's kind of transition back. I feel like I took you down a funny tangent, but let's go back a little bit to this idea of forced to go back, return to the office. I wanted to talk about more okay, let's say that we've made a compelling case and we've got some high-powered CEOs listening to this show and they've softened a little now on their position and they're like, okay, we want to talk about it. Do you mind talking a little bit about just sort of the aspects of culture that then need to be implemented if we're going to start going easy? And these could be things like, how do we build better relationships? How do we become truly empathetic? How do we install this new ethos in our company that just until 5 minutes ago in this podcast, we were thinking we were going back to the office full time, but now we're rethinking it.
Yeah. That's a really, really good question. And I think the main point that I would like to make, to kind of answer that is, if you haven't been in a growth mindset as a leader and as a company, or a learning first company, there's been all sorts of terms that you've been hearing lately. Then you need to really try to make that shift. So you're a leader and you'd be like, you know what, I was going to make everyone go back to the office, but then I heard Ryan's dope ass podcast and I'm not going to do that. Okay. So what should I do? It's difficult. Change is hard, but the idea of always learning, always creating kind of a culture of feedback, a feedback culture, a learning first culture, because what those things are, it's more like you switching from being the professor in a classroom to being the student. Allow yourself as a leader to be the student. and encourage feedback. And what I mean by encouraging feedback is that you can't just do a survey and that's it. You have to think about all the different modalities of feedback that you can utilize to get the pulse. Because the only way that you're going to get empathy, diversity and inclusion, we talk a lot about this, but the only way you can gain empathy is if you can hear someone else's story so you can actually feel what they're feeling. So you have to get in that person's shoes to get their perspective to gain the empathy from their side. So in order for leaders to do that, you have to really shift your mind from, reactive or, the professor up in the front telling everybody to like, how can we do this? And you have to really embrace the idea behind all the different modalities of feedback. So open forums, they have a place. Employee resource groups, there's a place for that, as far as, allowing people who have similar interests to come together and have discussions. We talked about surveys. That's a good thing because, it's data. But the key thing here, I would say, Ryan, is the idea of adopting a feedback growth mindset, that learning thing, because you want to learn from your employees. You want that back and forth. And I think that's by far the most critical.
Yeah, I think that seems to be right.
And then having an action plan. Articulating what you've heard. I think that's important. I'm sorry. A lot of people, sorry to cut you off there, but a lot of people do the feedback. A lot of people do the feedback, but then they don't articulate back what they heard or say back what they heard and articulate maybe an action plan or show what it is that you're thinking of, how you can take steps forward based on that feedback. So take the feedback, articulate what you've heard so that everybody understands it, and then provide an action plan on what you anticipate doing.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think in a lot of, successful remote organizations, you see sort of a structure that is a little, I guess, less vertical and a little more shallow. Not to say that they don't have a hierarchy, there's still a CEO, there's still those guys, but in terms of practice, they seem to be much more on the same level as the people that work for them, right? I mean, everybody's bringing their skills to the table and we work together as a team because we have all these different skills, so, but rather than that top level, as you put it, sort of this idea of being the professor at the front of the room, instead of that, I'm not Mr. CEO. Now, maybe my job is to provide a vision and my job is to provide, sort of, employee safety or, enact policy or whatever. But, your jobs are no less important than mine. Our job doesn't work if we're not working together. So I think that makes sense. And, one of the things you were just talking about, actually, the thing you sort of closed on there, this idea of an action plan, what I think it really leans into is this idea of transparency. And being transparent. And, transparency is obviously one of these super buzzy words. Like you hear it all the time these days, transparency. But I think it's, really a critical idea. And, I've spent a lot of time talking to a lot of people recently about transparency and how we actually impose it. And actually, I think maybe it makes sense to sort of talk a little about that topic here as we sort of wind down. As it sort of completes our loop, right? We began with sort of a discussion on trust and empathy and these sorts of things as it pertained to this return to work, so maybe now we talk about a little bit of what that looks like. Now we're back, we're in the office and working out of the office. We're maybe now a hybrid team, and the way that we're communicating is open and transparent. Do you mind sharing any insights on that?
Yeah, as far as transparency goes, again, they just keep popping up. Buffer just keeps popping up. We need some more wide open transparency companies to pull case studies from. But the idea of having a really, really good internal marketing strategy, I think is really, really important because, just like external marketing, right? You have an external marketing plan. It talks about the highlights, it's informing people of the things that are going on. It's the exact same thing for internal marketing. A lot of companies do not have an internal marketing strategy, and same with, but you have an external marketing strategy and there's a cadence on when you do things. Well, same with internal. You really need to kind of think about that strategy of how you're going to inform and when you're going to inform. The other thing is just the idea of asynchronous versus synchronous. I know a lot of people are hearing a ton about this right now, but the idea of working asynchronously kind of forces you into transparency because you're posting something and everyone can view it whenever they can view it whenever it's convenient to them. So that's another kind of important piece in transparency, is having kind of the plan of when and how you're going to communicate, but then also kind of acting on it with different types of tools and stuff. So wikis are really important. The intranets are really important right now. Project management tools are great. I mean, the project management tools have popped up everywhere over the past few years. The Trellos years ago, and those are great because you can actually, if used correctly, right, you can actually see what's going on with projects and tasks without actually checking on people. So, I would say transparency is critical, and in order to really be effective at it, you have to be, you're going to hear this word a lot, intentional, right? You have to come up with an intentional plan so that everybody is on equal level with access to information.
Kaleem, can I tell you how thrilled to death I am that you said intentional this episode and not me? Everybody who has paid attention to this episode or has followed it these last 3 seasons has heard me say intentional in about every episode. And, but I think, it's the word, it's the magic word, right? And it's how we become more empathetic. It's how we become more deserving of people's trust. It's how we become more transparent. It's all these things, right? So, it really is the word of the day. And so, but I'm grateful somebody besides me said it, because I probably sound like I'm beating a drum over here. So, but
Me as well. I would say, wait, are you ready? You want to know remote work? All of us remote work, advocates, consultants, coaches, whatever you want to call us. Here we go. You ready? Transparency, feedback, and intentionality. Done.
Yep. That's it. That's the whole thing. God, look at that. We solved remote work. So,
Done.
I love it.
Just like that.
Yeah. Now hire us to implement. That'll be the thing.
There we go.
But I love that. And I think it's really important. I think one of the biggest things, especially on a remote team, but even in a co-located team or in sort of a traditional environment, being open and transparent, making sure that everybody has sort of alignment around mission and vision, and, understanding why we're doing what we're doing, why is it that it matters, is really valuable. I talk a lot about this guy, Chris Do. He has a company called The Future, and The Future is one of these businesses, is very transparent. And he's one of the examples I'm most familiar with. But anyway, with his employees, they know what a job is worth and how much money is coming in and how much their contribution contributed to that and that sort of thing. And if sales are down and their numbers are down, then they start going, geez, well, I understand why, my job might be at risk or whatever. And they have kind of a dog in the fight, and I think that's a really important thing, but I think it comes from those 3 magic words. Right. And so I think that's it. Well, so Kaleem,
last thing I wanted to say, because I know we could keep talking forever, is who is the U.S.'s largest employer? Do you know?
Government, I guess.
Good call. Nice. You're correct. And guess whose salaries are all public?
Yeah. Government.
I mean, like it's hilarious, but the government's transparent with salaries, budgets, and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
But we as companies, we feel some kind of way that we can't do that. I just find that very.
Well, and I think it goes back. You mentioned earlier this idea of having a growth mindset, which, the opposite of is sort of a scarcity mindset. And when you operate from a position of being scared or that, resources are scarce, then you get into this mode where you really want to kind of keep everything to yourself, right? You're trying to protect all, everything you've got. And that doesn't allow you to be a very open leader or a very transparent manager or any of this stuff. It sort of hinders your communication. You're always keeping secrets. It doesn't lend itself to a very good situation. And so I think opening that stuff up and, sure, it's a little bit uncomfortable, but the more you talk about what you make or the more you talk about your, whatever, the more comfortable it gets. And, people will understand, oh, okay, well, you have a PhD and you make more money than my bachelor's degree. Okay, well, fine. I'm not going to resent you for that. I understand you've got more training than me. Or you've been here.
Hard.
Yeah. You've been here 20 years and I just got here, of course you're going to make more than me. We're not going to resent you for that. So, people get a little squirrely when it comes to that stuff, but I think you're right that it's gotta be out there on the table. So, and,
Awesome.
you know, and ultimately just to, like I said, close the loop. I mean, that is sort of trust, right? That's empathy. That's the faith that we have to put in the people that we work with. That they're not out to get us, that we're all actually here together. And if you can open your mind up that way, then there's no reason to force the return back to the office. You know, listen to your people and be truly people first. You know, that's another one of those buzzwords that you hear all the time is we're people first. And, you know, there's 50% of companies not listening to their people right now. So are you truly people first? So
don't be back to the office required. How about back to the office not required?
Yep.
I mean, it's
I love that. Yep. I love that. Well, hey, Kaleem, in these last couple minutes, do you want to tell people, the people who've been so kind to tune in and join this roller coaster ride with us, do you mind telling them where they can find out more about you, get involved, or maybe get in touch if they had hoped to, book you for speaking or for consult, whatever?
Sure. Yeah. Doing a lot of speaking. You can check out blendmeinc.com. You can see all of our cool events that we've been doing. And if you're just curious about how your remote employee experience is doing, we have a free remote employee experience assessment that we call TREE. And I'm Kaleem Clarkson everywhere. So Kaleem and then Clarkson, Twitter, LinkedIn. And then, of course, you mentioned this earlier. You join us a lot on Clubhouse every Wednesday, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We host Remote Work Wednesdays, so you can join us there.
Yep, that's awesome, Kaleem. And I do want to just make one other little plug for you for everybody who is an active Slack user. The Remotely One community is great. There's always comments going back and forth, people sharing articles, resources. I mean, I've actually hired a couple guys off of there, all kinds of things. So it's a great resource and it's free at last check anyway. I think it's free, or at least has a free option. Yeah. So go over to that website, Remotely One. What's the URL?
Remotely1.com.
Okay. Yeah. Remotely1.com. And there's a button at the top that says apply or apply now, and go ahead and get registered and see if you can get into the community, because it's truly valuable. And, you know, as we mentioned in the intro at the beginning, it's sort of designed to help reduce isolation and give people a channel for communication with other remote working professionals. So it's a great community for people to get involved with. So, Kaleem,
thanks for the plug, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for doing this, man. I was grateful to finally sit down and have sort of a long form discussion with you. We've been ships in the night on Clubhouse and everywhere else, it seems like, for these last couple of years. So I'm really grateful to have had the time to sit down with you.
Awesome, man. Really appreciate being here. Thank you so much.